Hello world, hello everybody. This is GDE Curious for Machine Learning. I'm super excited today to be talking about this amazing book, which is Sculpting Data for Machine Learning, the first app or machine learning that is actually co-written with with a really good friend of mine, which is Jigjasa Grover. She's gonna join us in this talk, and we are going to discuss a little bit about some topics of the book, and I'm super happy to have her. She is a machine learning engineer at Twitter currently. She studied at University of San Diego, and she is also contributing a lot to open source. And I know she's been doing a lot of talks, international and academic, and I'm so happy to have you here. I know we met back in 2019 in Santo
Yeah, that seems a
Domingo.
lot.
Yeah, but it's so exciting that we met in an event from the GDG Santo Domingo. And it was super cool to get to know her and to know about her job in open source, in data science, what she's doing with Twitter now, and her new baby, which is the book, which is super exciting. Hello, Jigjasa,
Yeah.
how are you?
Hey, I'm all good. Hope you're doing well today as well.
I'm
Definitely
so happy to have
2019.
you.
Yeah, 2019 seems like so many years ago. Like, yeah, we've been like in touch. So that's a good thing. That's the power of open source, I
Yeah.
would say.
I find it super exciting because it's like almost 2 years, and it's
Hmm.
really nice to follow each other jobs, like content, what we are doing, what we are working on, and it's really nice to keep in the loop in this community.
Totally, totally.
Yeah, Jigjasa, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about your work and how you start about this book.
Yeah, for sure. So, hey everyone, my name is Jigyasa Grover, as Leslie said. I work as a machine learning engineer currently at Twitter in San Francisco. I also recently co authored a book which is titled Sculpting Data for ML. It is a culmination of me and my co authors. Myriad experiences from brief stints at Facebook, Amazon. We've both worked in research as well as in industry. So the backgrounds include open source, data science, mathematical modeling, and software engineering. This is where all these experiences came through. I've graduated from University of California, San Diego, with a master's degree in computer science, and I'm presently applying my past experiences towards applied machine learning in the online advertisements, prediction, and ranking domain. How this book came into being was when COVID hit us all. We were all in like a kind of say stay at home orders, and during weekends you didn't have like really like things to do or like go out, and that's when me and my co-author decided to he'd already done a lot of like data set curations, so we decided to write a blog on how to actually go about if someone wants to like make their own data set, how to actually go about it. So it actually started as like putting our thoughts together, and then the blog became too long, and then we had like so many different things and tips and tricks that we wanted to share with everyone, that by the end of the year it ended up being like almost a 200-page book, which I'm so glad to put forward because it includes like not the usual theoretical stuff you would find in like machine learning books. It is more about how to get started from the data perspective. And it's not only just the theoretical book, as I said, it also includes like code snippets in Python. So it's basically like a step to step guide towards it.
Yeah, and it's super exciting, as you mentioned. We usually when we start with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, we already have this flow, right? To have
Hmm.
data, to pre-process, to focus on the model in the testing, and later on to deployment and so on. And
Hmm.
sometimes when we are learning at university, I also did some courses related. We already have a data set, and your
Totally.
mission is to clean it, clean it, and to organize it, and sort of the pre-processing. But it's important to think like when you really want to have your own research or your own job, like in something that you are interested. For example, I'm interested in education. I know data is there, web
Hmm.
and the internet, but sometimes it's hard to actually get a data set, and it might be
Hmm.
hard to to understand how to build this data set. That's why I'm super excited for this book, because it's actually taking the first steps into data science, into building the data set. And as a matter of introduction, it's really interesting how you're addressing this main point, which are actually the dataset extraction, the preparation, the pre-processing, what is the feature engineering, and then you go
Mhm.
also into data balancing and the handle error and so on, which actually it's reading this book teach you how to do all this previous work and to actually finish with the data
Mhm.
set. That's going to be the starting point for the next steps, right?
That's true.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. I don't want to spoil many things of the book. I think it's really worth it to read it and to check it. But I would really like to discuss a little bit about the data, say extraction, for example. In your
Mhm.
experience, what has been the hardest data sets you have been working on in this specific step of extraction?
Mhm. For sure. So, as Leslie, you were saying, many people, when they think about, the entire workflow of machine learning, the majority focus is basically on how to do model, which model to choose, which metric to choose, and how to inference. And most of the times, people forget that the initial part, that data you use, actually affects a lot of like modeling results. So basically, your model is as good as you input the data in it, right? I was also talking to someone earlier this week, and they too mentioned that when you're in academia, or sometimes when you're just doing like a class project, you take it for granted that you have like a clean data set to your disposal, right? You can just like input the data set directly to the model and how it usually works. But when you go into like a novel field where you don't have like data set present, or when you work in the industry, where all you have like is access to unstructured raw logs or unstructured data, or you really have to like go in depth to extract the meaningful features, to extract data signals. And for me, as like working in machine learning field, I believe whenever we have like raw logs or unstructured data, that is when is the most difficult or challenging aspect to create like a labeled data set out of it, or like a meaningful data set out of it. And in the book as well, we talk about different approaches you have to take, considering the why you actually want to create that data. So if you have like a specific problem in mind, you would go with the guided search. If you're just like looking for novelty and like unique points, unguided search, that's what we talk in the book about. So it totally comes up to why you want to do the data curation part.
Yeah, that's very important because when you are trying to build a project based on data, on AI, it's very important to think about the objective and the focus. And that also takes you to understand your data, right? That's why when
Mhm.
we talk about data science, we are talking about, programming skills, math skills, and also the business knowledge, which is super important. So maybe
100%.
maybe Jigjasa wants to share about some experience in some interesting data that you have been working on.
um, so interesting data sets that you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, in
So
your experience.
yeah, for sure. So, as mentioned, like I work in the online advertisements prediction and ranking domain. So, in itself, it is a very interesting domain because, you have to keep in mind about user interests and what they would like to see as an advertisement. You should be like as subtle as possible and not in the face that you're showing an advertisement. So, um, taking into account user interest is definitely something of a challenging data set, I would say. Yet on the same aspect, you have to keep in mind that you're not like invading someone's privacy, or like not exposing someone's like sensitive or personal information. So in that way, it is definitely a challenging data set. And how to basically go about protecting that privacy and protecting that data also is something that we talk about in the book, about how you can anonymize the data and protect the personal information of someone. So all these little things you have to take care of. Like you cannot just like simply scrape something from the internet and put it out there for the world, because you have to make sure that you're not leaking someone's address, someone's information, or like anything that something's like very private about.
Yeah, that's very important. That's the another point I wanted to address, which is actually privacy. I know we are
Mhm.
talking about data and having a lot of data to fit our models and to have them better. And so, but also there has been this other side, like data privacy and what you're doing. I've been checking some stuff related to PyTorch and Facebook AI, which is doing like this data, like anonymization, as you mentioned.
Hmm.
But I really like that you address actually this point, which is like, okay, we need data. We need to go
Hmm.
for the data. But as you mentioned, I cannot, like have people's name, address, and so on, which I think is very important to take care of, right?
Totally, yeah. And but sometimes, as you say, like it is necessary for you to some like associate a person with a particular area, right? So there are different methods you could, do that association and still keep that link present in your data set, but with certain kind of like tips and tricks, here and there. And yeah, that's what exactly the book talks about, like how you could like overcome that without actually exposing all of it.
Indeed, I really
Yeah.
like the idea that you are sharing all the experience. As you mentioned, it was a blog like to help people that are getting started with
Hmm.
data. But it's really nice that it's actually compiling the book. You have examples, some sort of examples in Python. I really like this beautiful soap. How you already started? Yeah, maybe you can give us a short intro. What is beautiful soap, and just give it
Hmm.
the important part for later to read the book.
Yeah, for sure. So, as Leslie mentioned, definitely, what in this book we are trying to do, we're not trying to put like just like theoretical stuff, like just dump all these. Oh, you can do this, you can do that. So when you maybe have access to the book or you purchase the book, in the links you would get like um, the gist and GitHub repositories access, where we already have the code set up. So you could try those code snippets on yourself on maybe the same data set or a different data set. What that helps you do is retain the information better, because when you have like practical experience with it, like this is not something that just like in words, but you can actually use it in like real life or practical life. And we've also made sure that we use as many tools as possible which are open source or which are out there in the public for you, because I'm a huge proponent for open source, and I believe like that's where all the creativity and inclusion comes into place. So for tools we've used a Chrome driver, like easy tools, not a lot, just like 3 tools. The programming language we've used is Python, which I believe is very inherent to data science and machine learning, especially for people who are starting. And not only for people who are starting, even for people like who are in the industry. I've been in the industry for like 2 years and more, doing machine learning. And we've been using Python for like the most of it. So it uses Python, then Chrome driver and Beautiful Soup, and Selenium. So Selenium is something which would help, automate the process. Once you've written a script and you want to run it for like say 10 different pages with button clicks and all, so that is something. And Beautiful Soup is something, let's say you have like an HTML page and you want to extract like specific things from it. Uh, so using Python and Beautiful Soup, like the library, you could basically extract from the HTML tags the information. So basically it would help you, kind of like scrape off information off a particular web page.
Yeah, that's really cool because, as you mentioned, sometimes we know the theory, like how is this supposed to do it? And
Hmm.
at the moment of the real life, it's like, okay, I know I need to get these tags and these like metadata and so on, but how what should I do and from where? And that's something I really like from the first part where you are talking about data set extraction, because you're talking about this where are you getting this data, how, step by step. I really like the tools as you mentioned. And I
Hmm.
just wanted to go on a pause here from the book and to talk a little bit about the open source contribution. I know you've been advocating a lot for that, and I would really like
Hmm.
to know a little bit how you started, what was your main motivation, and how which message would you like to share with people in order like to also motivate them to get in more into open source?
Yeah, for sure. Now that I think about it, it's been quite a while since I got associated with open source, and it was not something that I had planned to. It just happened by chance. So I was in undergrad it seems like a long years ago. So it was about like 2013 or 2014. I was in undergrad, and I was just like randomly scrolling through Twitter, like not having much idea on like what I wanted to pursue in future, where I came across um, something known as pharo, pharo. And when you first think of pharo, you think about Egyptian mummies and all these wrapped in bandages and stuff. I never thought it could be related to programming, so I went home and googled it up. And I was quite fascinated that pharo was like an open source environment built in Smalltalk. So I thought like, and they had like a link to a chat channel back in those days. IRC was very popular. So I joined the chat channel and I came across a person, Martin, who was online that time. I said like, hey, my name is Chigyas. I recently came to know about what is Pharo. Could you like guide me in knowing more about it? So he sent me like a couple of documents to get started with. So that I would say was my first introduction to open source. I found some bugs in the tutorials they had presented, reported back to Martin saying, oh, this is something that does not work. He said, why not, do a pull request? And that was my first ever contribution to open source. I would not say it was heavily technical. I would not say it was. So it was like a mix of, technical tutorial as well as like documentation because I was helping improve documentation at that time. So starting from that point, I got heavily involved in open source, especially with Pharo. Ended up applying to Google Summer of Code, did that twice, and then now I mentor GSOC students and GCI, not in a big capacity, but previously, like a couple of years ago, I was the organization administrator for a Pharo organization because I wanted to, give back to the community. So this is how basically I've been involved into open source, and it was not something that I planned. But in case you're interested, I would say a planned approach would definitely help. Coding is not the only way to get involved in open source. Research, documentation, design, these are all different ways you could get involved.
Super cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really think it's important, knowledge is there. We can learn from there. We can contribute. And as you mentioned, coding is not the only way to contribute it. I have
Mhm.
found people also that contribute on tutorials, on documentation, as you mentioned. And I think is super important as well. And yeah, congratulations for being working on this. It looks super
Yeah,
exciting. I got to know
thank you.
Faro a couple of years ago as well, and I found it
Mhm.
exciting. It's super cool
Yeah,
to have these people sharing knowledge. It's like
yeah.
it's like being in a conference with reading people what they are doing. So cool,
Mhm.
yeah. So I want to go back to the book and to talk a little bit about data set preparation and feature engineering. What would you think are the real challenges when talking about feature engineering?
Mhm. So there are a couple of features that I think like challenges I believe are prevalent, especially in the feature engineering domain, would be like there is like a misconception saying that the more number of features your model has, the better it's going to perform, which is like not true, I would say, because sometimes having, first of all, having a lot of features bloats up the feature space, right? You have, like in majority times you have like a limited space that you have to work with. You cannot have like infinite memory. And the second thing is as long as you keep on adding correlated features, it does not really help the model. So it is very necessary to keep your feature space to the minimal, adding only those features which have provide a lot of data signal to the model. That is one major challenge that is like that you usually face. And the second would be how to know like what features to add and like what not to add and all. So feature engineering, as also quoted in the book, is kind of like an applied machine learning. So there are a lot of like automated tools that you could use these days to basically start like feature engineering at first, and then you could like reduce it by doing feature selection. And there are like multiple techniques that have been also mentioned in the book.
Yeah, that's really cool because, as you mentioned, it doesn't mean like if you have more features, it's gonna be better.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to reduce them, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
and that also takes me to the idea that also it depends of data quantity. In your experience, what would you say about that? I know you also mentioned a little bit about this in the book about the volume of data,
Hmm.
and I know sometimes people ask like, I want to do this project. I have this data set, this data, and is it okay? Should I have more? What should I
Hmm.
do? So what are your thoughts about it? Like the data volume?
For sure. So there's not like a hard and fast rule about like how much data is enough data, but it is definitely a good question that you should answer. when you start with a project or when you start with like creating a data set. So the first thing is like the amount of data is dependent on the kind of problem you have. So if it's a classification problem, you have to like find the ratios with respect to the number of total classes you have. If you have regression, you have to find with uh, just bin the intervals. So it totally depends on the kind of problem you're facing, and there's no like a hard and fast rule about it.
Yeah, and also back to the idea, we need programming skills, math skills, and business
Hmm.
knowledge, which are
Yeah.
like super important, right? Yeah, that's super cool. And you also talk in the book a bit about machine learning models. What is your favorite like models or techniques from machine learning so far in your experience?
In my experience, I would say sometimes most of like simple models end up performing much better because it's not only easy to just like wire them up, but it's also easy to understand them. Like, for example, neural networks are definitely cool, but they are, and they would give like impressive results. But at the end of the day, they are nothing but just like a black box. You do not know where information is basically traveling, how the weights are changing, and how to basically compute feature importance, what features giving more signal. Though there are new techniques that are coming up which help us, do feature importance ranking or feature correlation studies in them. But yeah, sometimes just like stick to simpler models or something that you can understand as a human, with maths and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's an important advice because I know when we are starting to learn about machine learning models, we just get to use frameworks and
Hmm.
everything. Like, this is going to be my input, and I may get this output because I may know how it works inside. Then, if you
Yeah.
go like a bit deeper, it makes a bit more sense, right? Like, why it's not
Hmm.
working or why is it working well? And yeah, as you mentioned, I think it's very important to also to at least try to understand what's happening, what's the math behind. And yeah, I agree. In my experience as well, like simple models sometimes are better
Hmm.
and
Yeah, totally.
impressively.
Especially when you have to do like custom stuff. For example, you have to introduce like a custom loss function or a custom, like the more you understand the working, it's easier to introduce that aspect.
Yeah, and that's a lot of practice. We also need
Hmm.
to train ourselves in how to work with data. That's the important thing. Yeah, and the last part is very interesting, the data balancing, the handle errors. I've been a bit like thoughtful about data balancing. I know most of the issues in AI or machine learning are coming for not having like enough diversity in data, enough like cases where we are teaching our models to do like to classify or to understand stuff.
Hmm.
So could you tell us a bit more about this specific topic in the sense like why it's important, and maybe in your experience what problems have you found or addressed due to this data balancing?
Yeah, for sure. So data balancing, especially comes into play when you're doing kind of like, say, classification problems, especially because you don't want the majority class that you have to, weigh over the minority class that might be present. But again, it depends on, the problem statement you have in mind, because sometimes you have to weigh, minority class over because you're kind of doing like, say, anomaly detection. So it totally depends on the kind of eyes you see a problem from. Is it kind of like a classification or is it like an anomaly detection? There's certain ways you could overcome it. Sampling is one of the way, weighting is one of the way. So again, as I said, there is no hard and fast rules for things. Also mentioned in the book, we say depending on the kind of problem you have, and then we also give like a couple of examples in it. So yeah, that's what my take on it is.
Yeah, it's really true, and that keeps me thinking like sometimes people like we have like so much science fiction and we think about artificial intelligence like doing the stuff they own. So now when you are building the models and you're addressing these issues with data, you actually realize that, man, you really need people having all this job done. And you have diversity. You have to have different point of view. I've been reading about artificial intelligence and product design, like to really understand what's the extra value and how we are delivering the product, and that's very connected to data. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as you mentioned, we are doing all this kind of job. It's because of the team that sometimes these uncommon things are happening on data, and also then the model and so on. Yeah, so I think
Mhm.
it's very important to, as you mentioned as well. Yeah, I really like this topic. And again, I think it's a really, really, really nice book. I want to share again the name. You can find it on Amazon. This is
Mhm.
Sculpting Data for ML, the first act of machine learning. And I really love it, the first act of machine learning, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we sometimes just like to go into decision trees and neural networks, which is super exciting. But then when you really want to do your project, it's like, oh, where should I get this data? And I just find like we complain that we don't have open data or
Totally,
so.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and also I would really like to highlight the thing of the open source and the different tools that are recommended in the book. I think it's super cool that you can have access to them and you can practice along with the examples. And yeah, so maybe Jigyasa also would like to share a bit about how you got started in machine learning and why are you so excited about this topic?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned, I was doing a lot of open source projects back in undergrad, and during my second time of Google Summer of Code, I ended up working on Suzy, and it was Suzy was basically aimed at building an open source virtual digital assistant, much like Siri and Cortana, but like in the open source domain. So that's where I came across, natural language processing, machine learning, all these terms, and something clicked in me, and I thought, like, why should I not like explore this a bit more? I started taking up classes in machine learning at my school, which might not be they did give me like a theoretical background, I would say, but weren't that interesting for me enough to pursue a career in it. uh, but I wanted to, like, I had done a bit of my part in, like, Android app development, web app development, open source, and I wanted to try out something different because I'd seen, like, during undergrad, it's the time when you, like, most explore the most and try out different things. So I started applying for research internships, and I was fortunate enough to do two or three of research internships in National Research Council of Canada, then Institute of Research and Development France. So that's where my interest in machine learning basically began, and I thought, like, why not do like a specialization in that? I ended up applying to University of California, San Diego for my master's degree. So all these experiences have actually helped me push a little more towards machine learning every day. And even today at my work, I end up learning a lot of new things.
Yeah, that's really cool, and thank you for sharing your story. I think it's really interesting, like how people are getting into AI, like from different
Mhm.
perspectives, and how they are also bringing value to this, right? And also, you have found like an interesting way, something you like, and to level up content and to read that book. And also, I want to know how long it took. I think you mentioned at the beginning, but maybe you can give us more details about like your experience writing this book.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we didn't like, writing a book was always on my bucket list. Like, but I had never mentioned, like, I had never thought that it would happen like so soon. For me, 2020, like 2020 in general was like such a difficult year for so many people out there in the world. Like, my heart totally goes out to them. But it was a blessing in disguise for us because staying at home, we started, putting, initially, it was just like a Google Doc, and we just like dumped all our ideas in it, thinking where to take it forward from. And then we like got the we started like formalizing the content, thinking how we could put it in different chapters and stuff. We also got in touch with, basically, the we got like certain publishers reached out to us when we, like, showed like, we when we showed interest in, like, oh, we were trying to build a book. But then we thought, like, it's quarantine, we can, there's another skill that we could learn, and that's how we actually, I asked one of my friends who's in like Adobe. She helped us, like, with the software we could use to, like, basically write a book and typescript it out. So all of the stuff that we have done, right from like purchasing the ISBN number to developing the content, writing the graphics, writing code snippets, and eventually, like, putting it into a book format using all these publishing house tools. We've done it A to Z from scratch on our own throughout the year. So I'd say it was like a huge learning experience. I can, like, proudly say that, yeah, I can type out the book and, print it out in like an EPUB format, or the format which, you give to publishing house and stuff. So it has been a roller coaster ride. Definitely. You have your, days when you don't, a writer's block. I never knew what it was until, I started writing the book. So over the course of like a handful of months, we have developed it like from scratch.
Wow, congratulations. And I
Yeah.
think it's super exciting. I mean, I'm super fan of blogs, and when I start blogging, I just sort of thought like I should write a book related to this, because I know when you are sharing something that you really like, it's like super exciting to keep sharing
Mhm.
about it, right? And yeah, I know it might be a lot of work at the beginning, and I imagine that you may have to balance with your daily job, with your life and house and everything, and then
Yeah,
get the time to write, because as you mentioned, you did some code snapping, and also like the exercises themselves, and typing to check like you are
yeah.
typing information that's also like didactic, like academic,
Mhm.
understandable. And yeah, I know it's a lot of job, but congratulations. I think it's super cool, and now
Yeah,
it's
thank you so
there.
much.
Yeah, yeah, sure. And I would also motivate like everybody that is watching us to check the book. It's on Amazon, Sculpting Data for ML, the first act of machine learning. And yeah, to learn more about this first act, as we
Yeah.
mentioned. And yeah, just how you came up with the name. I know it might be hard as well.
Yeah, so we wanted to do something, we started with, data curation. That was something that we were planning to, name our blog post basically. But we wanted to do, something different. And we also wanted to, give it like a picture. So whenever we think about, what kind of like, how do you basically create the data, and then some we were looking at some random things when the idea of a pot basically pottery came into picture, like those ceramic potteries and earthen potteries that happen. And that's where it's like, oh, you should sculpt the data, basically giving it shape. Like giving it shape is something that came into first our mind. So the title was, okay, sculpting data for machine learning. That's what we had thought. But we also wanted to give it, yes, we also wanted to give it like a subtitle. And we thought, what kind of like things you do before actual machine learning. We started that way, what is the thing before you do modeling, and so on. And I guess I remember we were watching like a TV show or something, or just related to theater, I remember. And suddenly, when you go to like watch plays and stuff, they say, that's the first act. And I looked up the internet, it's looking like what exactly does first act mean. And they say when you introduce the characters of a play, that's what first act means. Like before the play starts, it's like a first act, you introduce like, this is the setting, these are the characters, and so on. And it instantly hit me, oh, exactly what we are trying to do is we are trying to like introduce the characters, what our machine learning would be based on. We're trying to introduce the data, we're trying to introduce those data signals and features based on which our model would work. So that's how the title came into being, like sculpting data for ML, which is the first act of machine
I love it. It's so
learning.
cool how you came up. I know sometimes like even naming a blog is like
Yeah.
hard. Like what can like summarize what I'm trying to share, and can
Mhm.
be also catchy, and can be like
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. We wanted
yeah.
it to be like catchy, something like, not like step to step, step by step guide in data set curation or something. We could have like named that, but we wanted it to, stand out, like be different from the rest. And I always want that unique element in whatever kind of like work I do, or like whatever I do in general life. I always pause and think for a second, like, am I not like, am I following the herd? Because I don't want to be like, someone who just like follows blindly people.
Mhm. Cool, cool. I really like it. And I'm sharing now on the screen. This is the Instagram. You can find info about the book, which is Data for ML. And I really like the pictures. And I just got to know about your book where you were like, I'm doing something and it looks like this. And I was like, oh, so you just got like this image. And I was like, you just got another hobby, maybe. And when you came up with the title and with the book itself, like the portrait, it was like so cool because that was my first thought, as you mentioned, like the very like this worry, like where I'm getting this data. And
Mhm.
yeah, I find it like super interesting when you are talking about these topics we have addressed so far. Well, yeah, and I also want to share your GitHub IO where you guys can find the info from Jasa about her talks and her blogs. I know you've been also in different podcasts, you've been doing some different conferences, which is super
Mhm.
cool always to learn from people. That's what I like about sharing knowledge. And yeah, Jigjasa, thank you so much for sharing this time, for talking
Thanks
about
a
the
lot.
book, your experience. I know it's super cool. And I hope we can have another chance later on to talk about more books or more stuff,
Yeah, for
more
for
stuff
sure.
about
Looking forward to
machine.
your book now, Leslie.
Oh yeah, yeah. I have to collect all
Go
the
for
blo-
it.
all the blogs and turn them into a book. Yeah, I'm looking
For
forward
sure.
for that. Again, I want to invite everybody to check this on Amazon, Sculpting Data for ML, the first act of machine learning. Just wrapping up, I really enjoy learning about data. I've
Mhm.
been reading this book this couple of days, and I really like how you guys are talking about data set extraction, preparation, pre-processing, feature engineering, some machine learning models about data balancing, handle errors, and all what is called the first act of machine learning. And yeah,
Totally.
we are not spoiling more about the book, but it's really cool. You have like a lot of tools, open source, and practice. And you also reach Jigjasa if you have questions, I guess. Yeah.
For
If you
sure.
have questions about the book, you can reach her info. And yeah, enjoy. It's really cool, and I really hope like people get excited about working with data, start building their own data sets, and start working on their models. And yeah, let's play with machine learning. Thank you again, dear Jigjasa. A big hug to San Francisco right now. Super cool.
Thank
And
you.
see you soon.
Thank you. Bye bye. See you soon. Thanks,
Bye
Leslie. It was a
bye.
pleasure. Bye bye.